All right, let's begin. I'm Joey from the Hearth team at Keller Williams Realty Professionals, and Lou and I are available if you or anyone you know are thinking about buying or selling a home. And I want to thank you so much for joining us today. We are excited to present our second weekly Lunch and Learn event with the lovely ladies from Weird Sisters Yarn in St. John's neighborhood. Today will be all about knitting, and we'll have a different topic each week. Make sure to like the Hearth team on Facebook so you can know the upcoming topics. We'll also highlight a charity each week, and you are encouraged to donate whatever you can. And this week we are highlighting the St. John's Center for Opportunity. Please welcome Phil Crowder to tell us a little bit about Center for Opportunity.
Yeah, hey everybody, I'm Phil. As Joey alluded to, been with on the board of directors for the Center of Opportunity for almost 3 years now. So our organization, based primarily in St. John's, we focus on the area of North Portland, specifically empowering marginalized neighbors around different things like community building, addressing basic needs, and people-centered economic development. A big thing for us this time of year is the farmers market. Specifically for us, we focus on food equity programming in the neighborhood. Obviously, there's nothing like a global pandemic to further the gap in food inequity and insecurity in our neighborhood, and it's definitely impacted our neighborhood. We're definitely passionate about helping out our neighbors have access to fresh fruit and fresh vegetables. And currently we have a donation, a campaign going on called our Fight for Food Equity program that can be found on the St. John Center for Opportunity website. As little as $10 can help a family to get fresh fruit and veggies for the week. Up to a $150 donation can help a family get fresh fruit and veggies for the entire season. A quick highlight, we actually help through these programs, help donate $12,000 to local families in our area last year. So all tied around food equity and our farmers market. So go ahead and check it out. We are a 501c3, so if you need tax deductions or tax write-off information, we can get that to you too. Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much, Phil. I love hearing about all the good work that you guys are doing. Appreciate you joining us. Now, without further ado, we are proud to present Fuchsia Troutman from Weird Sisters Yarn, and you can feel free to ask questions today via the chat function at the bottom of your screen. Fuchsia, welcome.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm Fuchsia. I'm the owner of Weird Sisters here in St. John's. So we're a local yarn shop. We are also inside of a bookstore. Two Rivers Books is the bookstore that we share our space with. And so we've got, in addition to yarn for knitting, crochet, and other fiber arts, we have a lot of great craft books too. So I just wanted to show you all a very quick little demo of how to knit. I'm basically going with the assumption that you've never knit before. So I wanted to just start with just a brief overview, some foundational elements. If you are interested in learning how to knit, there are tons of great resources online, so many good YouTube videos, blogs that really go into like in-depth how to hold your hand, how to move the yarn, all of that. I'm not going to spend a ton of time going over that. The part that I think that's really important for people to understand is just like the overview of what they're doing, so they have a point of reference for when you go home and you Google how to do the knit stitch, you'll like kind of have a frame of reference for what you're looking at. So I'm wearing a knit top here, so this is obviously like really complex with a lot of colors. This is just like one thing you could do with hand knitting. And then I also have this tank top here. So, there's like a huge variety of things you can do with knitting, which I really love about it. And then I've got, let's see here, a couple links I wanted to share with you for tutorials too, if any of you want some references. And then let me switch my camera here. All right. So I got a little sample here already knit up. I just knit this morning. And this is just a little swatch It could become, you know, like a dishcloth. This is 100% cotton yarn. And when you knit, what you're actually creating here is a series of loops inside of loops in a series of columns. So I wanted to just show you this fabric here so you can kind of get an understanding of the structure of knitting. So the first thing you probably notice are all these little loops on top of this needle here. So each one of those little loops on top of the needle is the stitches. So if you're told in a pattern to count your stitches, these are what you're counting, the little loops all the way across your needle. And there's actually a front side and a back side whenever you're knitting. And the front side is the side you want people to see. That's the good side. And then the back side is, you know, the hidden side. That tends to be not as pretty. Of course, you can make any side the right side or the wrong side, depending on your personal preference. So you can see here too that there's actually two different textures I've created here on this little sample. Down here, it's all bumpy. Here, it's nice and smooth. This is probably what you really think of when you think of what knitting looks like. To actually create this nice smooth fabric here, you actually have to employ two different stitches. So in basic knitting, when you create this nice flat knitted surface, that's actually called stockinette stitch. And that is two different stitches. When you're on the right side here, like I'm right now, you are creating a knit stitch all the way across your little loops on your needles. And then when you get to the end of your row here, when you turn over to the wrong side, you'll have to go all the way back across the wrong side and complete a purl stitch. So a purl stitch is basically the reverse of a knit stitch. So you get all these little bumps instead of this smooth surface. And so it's actually that series of smooth stitches and then bumpy stitches on the back that creates the smooth fabric. If you only do the knit stitch, the smooth stitch on the front and on the back side, you actually get this bumpy fabric here. And so that's how I created this bumpy fabric. Instead of doing a knit stitch and a purl stitch, I just knitted on the right side and I knitted on the back side. So that's something that I think can be confusing for beginner knitters, and I just wanted to explain because people will want to get this nice smooth look, but then they just learn the knit stitch and they get this bumpy. So I'm only going to show you cast on and a knit stitch. So if you only do the stitch I'm about to show you, you will only get this bumpy stitch. So I'm going to leave it up to you to look up the purl stitch in order to get the nice smooth fabric. But so that's the basics of just understanding what you're making when you do your stitches. I've got another pair of empty needles here, another set of yarn. So before you start knitting, you want to make sure you've got your needles, you've got your yarn. That's really all you need. Any size needles are fine. Super skinny is probably going to be too difficult to work with when you're a beginner. Really bulky, big, thick needles are also going to be a little difficult. So this is a size 9 needle. Anywhere from a size 7 to a size 9 needle is good for a beginner, I think, for starting out. It's just a comfortable, not too big, not too small size. And then the yarn I have here, yarn comes in a bunch of different sizes called yarn weights. This is a worsted weight yarn. And again, I like it for beginner knitters because it's not too skinny and not too thick. So it's just kind of easy to work with. And this is 100% cotton, so it's also nice for beginner knitters because when you're first starting out knitting, you kind of don't really always like what you make. And 100% cotton yarn can be repurposed for dishcloths, so you actually will have something useful at the end of it. The other great thing about starting with the dishcloth is it's just a square. It doesn't have to fit your body, it doesn't have to look a certain way, it's just a base gold square that you knit up and then you can use. So after you've got your needles and your yarn, the very first step is you have to cast on your stitches. Sorry, so you have to cast on all these little loops onto your needle. So that's what we're gonna do. The very first stitch you're gonna make is a slip knot. So I don't know if any of you know how to make a slip knot, but basically we have the end of your yarn here, which is called your tail. And then the yarn over here that's actually connected to your little ball of yarn, that's called your working yarn. So I'm going to take my working end of my yarn and cross it over to create a little loop here. And then I'm going to take the rest of that working yarn and actually pull it through that little loop I just created. And now I've got a slip knot. So I've got the tail end over here, the working yarn here, and I tug on the working end, it tightens up my slip knot. And then I'm gonna insert my needle into the loop, and I'm gonna pull that end of the working yarn to tighten up my slip knot around the needle. And that's how you create your very first stitch in knitting. And so now what I'm going to do is cast on. I'm just going to cast on a few stitches just to show you. Here I cast it on, 20 stitches, and that gets you with worsted weight yarn on regular size needles, roughly this little, 4-inch square. And when you cast on, you are creating your foundational row. There are a ton of different ways you can cast on. Tons of different preferences depending on whatever feels comfortable for you, whatever pattern you're knitting. Certain cast on methods are going to be better than others. But this is called the knitted cast on, and it is the most basic cast on, and it also is very similar to the actual knit stitch I'm going to show you after. So it's just an easy transition. So the way you're going to start is with the stitch on your slip knot stitch on your left-handed needle, and your working needle in your right hand. You're going to insert the tip of that right-handed needle from the front into that stitch through the back. So your working needle actually comes behind your left-hand needle. And then this is the working end of the yarn, not the tail end. That is what you're going to be working with. The tail end is just kind of there. We'll worry about that later. And with your right hand, oops, sorry, I'm a little off center, aren't I? I think it might be easier if I stand. You're going to take that yarn from around the back to the front, around your needle. And then you're going to take that yarn through the stitch that you had on your left needle, through it like that. So you're actually pulling that loop through your existing loop, and then you're placing that new loop you just created onto your left needle. So now I've got 2 loops where I just had one before. I'm gonna do that all over again.
Yeah, that's like magic.
So I'm inserting through the front of the new stitch to the back, come around the back, loop it around that back needle, pull that working yarn through your existing loop, and then put this new loop on your right needle back onto your left needle. So now you've got 3 stitches here. And I actually reversed that on accident. I'll explain that in a sec. And then you're going to do the same exact thing. Through the front to the back, loop from the back around the back needle, loop, pull that loop through the old loop and put the new loop onto the left needle. So you're just creating the series of stitches onto your left needle, however many you want, and you're gonna keep on going until you have the number of stitches either that you want or that your pattern calls for. So I'm just going to add a couple more here real quick, just so we have a few to work with, and then I'm going to show you how to actually start knitting. So when you go to those links that I sent you, or you Google, how to knit or how to make a dishcloth, it's going to really go into a lot more detail than I'm going into. There are quote unquote, right ways and wrong ways to hold your needles, to hold your yarn. I am left-handed. When people learn how to knit, they generally learn how to knit right-handed. So it's very awkward and uncomfortable for me. So I really believe in just kind of figuring out what feels comfortable for you. As long as you understand the basic concept of what you're trying to achieve, like, you'll be fine. You're just creating loops inside of loops. No one dies in knitting. So, all right.
Oh yeah,
Oh yeah.
I'm left-handed too, and I knit this way. is this, I'm sorry, did you say, is this the left-handed way?
No, so
This
this
is
is
yeah.
the right-handed way. So when you hold your yarn, there's a lot of different ways you can hold your yarn. The way that I'm holding my yarn here with it in my right hand, this is called English style of knitting. If I held the yarn in my left hand like this, that's certainly possible, and that's called continental style knitting. But you can do it either way from the beginning. There's no like right way to learn it or wrong way. This is just the way that's comfortable for me. And I also think it's easier to show in a video, English style. So that's why I'm doing it the way I'm doing it.
Thank you.
All right, so then once you've got the number of stitches that you want on your left needle, you are ready to knit your first row of stitches. So I've got my cast on row here, that's my foundation row, and I'm actually going to knit my very first row. And in this, for this specific purpose, it will differ from pattern to pattern. I'm going to say this is my right side. So earlier I explained that I accidentally put on a stitch backwards. So I'm gonna actually knit across this first row and then explain what I meant by putting the stitch on backwards, because that becomes pretty important. So just like I did before for my cast on from the front, I'm going to stick my needle into that first stitch. And then I'm going to bring my working yarn around the back, around that back needle, pull that back needle through that loop. And now I've got a new loop here. Oops. On my right needle and my old loop here. But instead of putting this stitch on back onto the left-handed needle, I'm actually gonna just let this stitch fall off the left needle and catch it. So now this new loop I've created, instead of being put onto the left needle, has caught the old loop down here. I'm gonna just keep on doing that. So it's basically the first step of the knitted cast on, but I'm dropping that left-handed stitch and then it's falling below. And so that's actually becoming the row below my new row of stitches here that are gathering on the right-handed needle. So there's actually a lot of rhymes out there to help you like memorize the steps for a knit stitch. This is one that I like. So the inserting of the right needle into the left needle, you're actually going to stab it. Stab, so you go ahead and stab. And then you're going to choke it, pull out the guts, and then throw it off a cliff. So that's just a cute way, especially for like older kids, to help them memorize the steps.
Well, heck, that'll work for me.
So stab it, oops, strangle it, pull out its guts, throw it off a cliff. And then you've got a knit stitch. It also helps, a lot of people will forget which way they're supposed to wind the yarn around the needle, and it helps me remember because you know, when you sneak up behind someone to choke them, you choke them from behind. So you want to wrap the yarn from behind the needle around before you scoop out their guts and then throw them off the cliff. So now I've gotten to the end of my row here, and you can see it's very messy right now. This is probably what yours will look like. It's totally fine. Once you've gotten a few rows going, the stitches will start to kind of form up a little bit better and coalesce a little bit better. I'm also using pretty big needles here for this yarn, just for video clarity purposes. But so when it looks all loosey-goosey like this, like don't worry, that's just how it looks when you start. So the thing I was going to say earlier about the stitches is, so now that I've got my first row of knitted stitches on here, I wanted to show you guys that each of these little loops on my needles, each of my stitches, actually has a structure to it, where each one is on the needle facing the same direction, where there's two little legs to these loops. There's a back leg and a front leg. The back leg is on the left side of the loop, and the front leg is the right side. So there's actually a direction that the yarn is facing on your needle. And it's a very common mistake to, if you insert the needle the wrong way or wrap the yarn the wrong way, to get a backwards loop. And that will make your fabric just turn out kind of funny. So if your fabric is looking a little funny and you're not sure why, check your stitches and make sure, do I have my stitches in the right direction? So this now is a backwards loop. I've got the front part of my loop and the back part of my loop reversed, where now it's the left leg in front and the right leg in the back. That's not correct. You want it to be the other way around, so that the right leg is in the front, left leg is in the back. So now if I wanted to actually create that smooth fabric I showed you earlier, now that I'm ready to turn my work around, I would actually have to create a purl stitch. So I get to the end of my row, I turn this around, I'm now ready to start from the right side, go all the way back across the left needle, purl stitching, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to do another row of knitting. So I'm starting exactly the same way I started before, because all I did was, when I got to the end of the row, was split the needle. Whoop. And now I'm on the back side, ready to go. Everything is identical to the first time around that I did this. Does anyone have any questions so far? No, no questions. All right. All right, so we've got our very first stitch here. I've got my little front leg is on the right and my back leg is on the left of my stitch, so I know I'm all good. And I'm gonna stab it through the front, choke it from the back, pull out the guts, and throw it off a cliff. And I'm just gonna do that all the way across. Sorry, the knitting needle knocking is probably not super great sounding.
You're fine.
All right. So that's the basic knit stitch. And if you just did that over and over again and you passed it on more stitches, you'd get this nice little bumpy fabric here, which actually is really great for a dishcloth because you want a little texture when you're drying your dishes. Something flat like this is also really great. And the way you get this is you do the knit stitch I just taught you on the front side, and you can go ahead and look up how to purl and do the purl stitches on the back side. The very first link that I put in the chat, let me just turn the camera around. So the very first link I put in the chat is from verypink.com. So Very Pink Knitting is just a video tutorial blog. She's got tons of great patterns for beginners. I think they're all free. So I would definitely not pay for anything for learning how to knit while you're stuck at home. If you can support a local yarn store, there are tons in Portland, including us. And we have shopping by appointment, and we also have online shopping too. And you can order learn to knit kits from us. And a lot of places are also offering, online classes. And so you could take an online class with a local yarn store. But there are lots of, if you just go online, there are also lots of classes that say, like sign up for $200 for this learn to knit class. Like, I think, in my opinion, you do not need to pay $200 to learn how to knit. So check out the free tutorials and then reach out to your local yarn stores for good project recommendations or for any local online classes that are being offered. The Very Pink Knitting has a super basic dishcloth pattern that is really easy, and we sell a Learn to Knit kit here for it. And if you are interested in that pattern, you can go ahead and just email me and I will email you the pattern. It's free. And my email is info@weirdsisтерsyarn.com. Let me put that in the chat.
And so will you offer any sort of one-on-one appointments if someone wants that?
Yeah, so we do private tutorials. We normally do them in person, $15 for a half-hour session. Obviously, we are not doing so one-on-one things right now. So we are doing online. We just are kind of in the middle of figuring it out. So for now, we're just doing little free 5-minute drop-ins. Or if you want to schedule a half-hour session, it's $5. So it's very inexpensive right now for little private sessions.
Great.
We are going to be doing classes too. So we haven't really gotten our online classes up and going, but if you just follow us, we are weirdsisтерsyarn.com is our website, or Weird Sisters Yarn on Instagram or Facebook. That's the best way to keep up to date with what we're doing.
Cool. And so how should you wash and care for your hand knitted items?
That's a really good question. So most hand knitted items, I would say, don't machine wash unless it's something like a dishcloth. You put a lot of time and energy into hand making this item, and a machine, even on gentle, is going to agitate it a lot more than the hand washing. If you absolutely have to machine wash your hand knitted stuff, look for cellulose fibers. So cotton yarn, linen yarn, or something called superwash yarn. 100% wool is my favorite thing to knit with, and that will shrink. Pretty much most animal fibers will shrink in the wash. And I don't just mean like shrink a little bit, but like you will start with an adult size sweater and come out with like a little teddy bear size sweater, and you don't want that. So hand wash, gentle. I fill, a sink or a bathtub with some water. I use just like a drop of gentle hand wash soap and soak it for 15 minutes and then rinse it, and then towel dry it gently and then block it into place. So it's quite a process if you're not used to hand washing stuff, but it's part of the fun of knitting if you really get into it.
I have an advanced knitting question for you, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So I found this hat pattern that I really love, and I made a couple of them. And they are, if I'm following the pattern, they're just a little bit big. I mean, it's a hat that like would adapt to anyone's head. Obviously the yarn is soft, but, and it's kind of a baggy, sort of a beret style, but I'm finding that it ends up being just a little too big for me. And I'm wondering I don't know how to adapt a pattern. I guess it's not really that advanced. I'm not great at adapting patterns, but.
So before you started, did you knit up a gauge swatch?
No, I never do that. It's terrible.
So that's like a whole tutorial or class in and of itself.
I know how to do it. I just am lazy.
Just a brief overview for people that don't know what we're talking about. If you want to knit something that actually fits like your body or fits a certain size, you have to first knit up what's called a gauge swatch, and the pattern will tell you, knit up this 4-inch square, and here's how many stitches when you count across your row you should have. And if you don't get that exact count that the pattern calls for, whatever you knit up is going to end up either smaller or bigger than what the pattern intends you to actually finish with. So that's why you would knit up a little gauge swatch to see how big your piece is going to turn out. So that would be my recommendation to you, Lou, is I would check the gauge of the pattern that you worked off of, and then just take the gauge of what you've got and see how off it is. And if it's just super off, you may just need to start over and try with a gauge swatch to match what the pattern is calling for. There are tricks you can do to make things smaller, though. If you need it just to be a little bit smaller, you can get a piece of elastic. Right now, that might be really hard because I know elastic is being used for mask making, but in non-COVID times, you can get a piece of elastic and actually put it around the brim of a hat or the sleeve or whatever, and then stitch around it to kind of tighten up what you have. You can also try to shrink it a little bit in the wash, or if it's too small, you can actually wet it and stretch it and pin it into place to kind of grow it. That's the cool thing about hand knitted stuff, is that it's customizable. And then wool fabric, especially wool fibers, are really malleable and will basically, they have a lot of memory in them naturally and will hold the shape of whatever you wet block it to.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
Are there any yarn materials that beginners should avoid, as in it's just for the advanced folks?
I would just stay away from anything expensive. Like cashmere is really expensive and it's gonna feel really nice and look really tempting, but it's hard to knit with. And when you're first starting out, you may end up with a lot of projects you're just not happy with or that don't fit right. So I say, try to err on the side of better value fiber, like 100% wool or 100% cotton. Or even, if you are at Joann's or Michael's or something like that, I don't like acrylic, like plasticky based fibers are just not really nice or pleasant to knit with. But there are some pretty good, like 50% acrylics and 50% wools out there that are a blend that are pretty nice as far as the synthetics go. But yeah, so cashmere is going to be also really slippery. So you don't want to start with that. Silk is going to be really slippery. Bamboo is going to be really slippery and hard to work with. And then anything that's like called a novelty yarn. Novelty yarns are yarns that have kind of like crazy stuff going on with them, like sequin or sparkles or glitter, and they look really cool, but they're just really hard to work with. So yeah, I would just stick with 100% wool or 100% cotton when you're starting out.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, that's me. I'm the beginner. But Lou is the advanced, so.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here, Fuchsia. We really appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. I just had a couple other tips too. Sorry.
Yeah, please do.
I was going through my checklist. When you're picking your first yarn to start with, I specifically have these colors out because they're light colors. I wouldn't go with anything dark because darker yarns are actually harder to see when you're knitting. And you really want to be able to see the shape of your stitch, like I explained. That's important to really get a feel for what your knitting's supposed to look like. So just pick lighter colors, white, baby blues, light, bright yellows, no blacks, no browns, dark grays. And then also you want to make sure to get enough yardage to start with. So like one of these is probably not really enough. I would want to get like twice as much as this to start with. All right.
That's great advice. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, hey, I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Philip, as well.
Yes, thank you, Philip. So everyone, don't forget to like the Hearth team on Facebook. You can find out what upcoming lunch and learns we're going to have each week on Wednesday at noon. Don't forget to donate to the St. John's Center for Opportunity and get your yarn supplies online from Weird Sisters Yarn. Thanks so much, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.